Leaky Pipeline stands for the decreasing proportion of women in university studies towards advanced and leading positions in research and science. And as mentioned before, I think we lose a lot of well-educated female scientists, and we lose talents. And this is something we cannot afford.
So we found a focus on reason and rationality. We found a focus on autonomy and mobility. And we found that success and competition in science are the only guiding principles in the life of the stereotypical scientist. So we hear being successful is essential. And finally, science is described as the only passion. My job is my life. So these stereotypes are very familiar. And what is important for us is that all these stereotypes are very closely linked with stereotypes of masculinity. And these attributes, and this is very important, are also linked with our concept of excellence. It's not the female researchers that don't make it, but they actively decide to leave academia in relatively great numbers because the stereotypical masculine working and life conditions are simply not attractive enough for them. They hurt. Therefore, the leaky pipeline can be interpreted as an active and conscious decision of female, but more and more also young male researchers between an academic career and a meaningful and well-balanced life.
A lot of the inequalities in organizations, and very much so in academic organizations, is rather what is not happening. The way that we have to try to capture non-actions, invisibilities, and lack of recognition, for instance. So it's very important to have this double perspective of seeing what is happening, but also what is not happening.
So I've been running workshops at the University of Michigan in the neuroscience program, trying to emphasize that microaggressions, sexual harassment in the laboratory happens in graduate school, it happens in postdocs, and the women I talk to who drop out before they even apply for a professor job, that is one of the #1 problems we have in the academy. So we don't make it easy because men and even some women will say little things like, oh, you're just going to have babies, or you don't really want to do this. And that tends to decrease women's likelihood of staying in academia and contributing to science.
When I got pregnant the first time, I had probably some of the worst comments I have ever heard about, so you're quitting academia, so you're stopping working. Why didn't you wait until you were unemployed to be pregnant? Typically, yeah, but not all women have children, so it cannot be the whole explanation. And that I had that answer since 7 years, I think. But I think at the same time, it is a reality when you are pregnant and the first person that knows that you are pregnant is the director of a creche so that you have a place, there is something fundamentally wrong with that.
We really have very, very bad conditions in Switzerland for a researcher with childcare responsibilities, and especially for mothers. I'm always told when I'm in contact with female scientists, international scientists especially, that they are shocked when they come to Switzerland and they come without a family network. So they are on themselves and cannot rely on a good infrastructure. And that's really a problem.
I think, especially when I was young, I always had the impression that I was doing things that I was not really supposed to do. And when I mentor young women who are doing their PhD or things like that, I think they often have this feeling also, although they don't express it that way.
It always takes time to be taken seriously. You need to ask too clever question for the standards of the room, to that people start even considering that you are in that room. And I think that was one of my biggest challenges. For me, what I find that in this space, that's the hardest, is that I always have the feeling that the accepted behaviors for me and for many female that I know is just much more restricted. You can be funny, but not too funny. You can be outspoken, but not too much. You can be shy, but not too much. So your accepted behavior are really much more narrow. And I think that long term is very harmful, because you're always much more attentive and pay attention on how you behave.
Women in high positions are extremely vulnerable because I think they are treated differently than men. This I think is absolutely true, absolutely true, and it's something that is not talked about much, but should be talked about.
They tell me, yeah, listen, we don't have a gender problem in our group. We have 2 women in our group. They feel very well. And then I asked them, did you ever talk to them if they really feel acknowledged and if they really feel well in the group? And then they tell me, no, I haven't.
When I just became a professor and I'm getting in all these leadership trainings, and it's often something, yeah, it's for women to make them like the man, and that's not the move forward.
My main thought is if one wants to increase gender diversity and equality, the first thing one needs to do is to stop denying that gender diversity exists, by which I mean differences between males and females that are at least partially biologically based. And related to that, in my opinion, one needs to stop equating gender equality with gender sameness.
Women are expected to be just like men when they're not, and they should be allowed to approach the roles that they are taking with their own perspectives and not expected to be just like men.
I think mixed teams, men and women, work better than teams that have only men or that have only women. And so it's good to have women in some top positions simply because they give diversity and they also give a view that is not necessarily the same as what a man would give as a view.
And then you need to understand that leadership in cultures is so important for especially diverse teams, be it diversity of women or internationality or even interdisciplinarity, and the competencies of the leaders create hard facts. Because most diverse teams are in the risk mode and they're not performing well, only because we have destroyers that focus the differences or that smooth equalizers that smooth over differences. So we need leaders that are creators and are able to see the differences and bridge between them in every second, including in the recruiting process.
If we start from the idea that women are equally well qualified and equally good scientists as men, and we end up with the result of more men in professorship and more men in panels, we come to the conclusion that there is no neutral situation. The situation where men are elected for panels and for professorships in a much higher number, there must be some kind of an informal male quota. If not, why would this be? If we are equally well qualified, the result should be equal. And as long as the result is not equal, something happens that favors men. So I would tell, how do you know that you were not elected into your professorship because of your gender? So how can men be so sure that they don't have an advantage because of their gender? And I think we just correcting a situation favoring men and introducing a more just and equal situation.
quota do not address all issues affecting gender bias. For example, the precipitous drop of women after postdoc, that is, women do not actually apply for professorial positions, that is not directly, at least not directly affected by quotas.
All universities should really use theory guidance, read studies, books, and involve experts. Acknowledge that emotions are facts, use a holistic and systemic approach, and invest in culture and leadership competencies to build true learning organizations, not the seemingly or the pretending to be learning organizations.
So, for example, we have a faculty of geology and environmental sciences, but there was a dean who had the idea of evaluating separately women application from men application. When they did that, you know, each time a professorship would open, they would get piles of applicants, and they would put the pile of female applicant on one side, the pile of male applicant on the other side, and they would evaluate them separately. And then they would invite the, I don't know, 3 best women, or the women they liked most, and the 3 best men for interviews and stuff. And this has resulted in the hiring of many women in that faculty, which, you know, so from 0% to something was an infinite increase in the percentage of women.
Before a woman goes out on maternity leave, she writes a very short proposal to our directorate to say, you know, what would she do with, it's essentially about 20,000 francs, right? And all we say is, you want to use this money so you can delegate work that can be delegated, and that you can focus on the work that you need to put priority on, right? And this does a couple of things. It makes the women think, even before they go out on their maternity leave, of what is really the critical aspects of their job that they need to focus on. It also sends a message to those women and everybody else who works at Aroud that we want these women to come back, that we value these women, we value their contribution.
I'm going to present you the 10 calls to action, that these 10 calls can be followed by each and everyone in academia, regardless of their position.
I also have a lot of self-doubt, but then I realized that the only way to learn to deal with that was to expose myself even more and to accept that rejections are part of life, that not everything is straight in front of you, and sometimes you have to jump in this unknown.
I agree that there is the factor of luck, but in all the stories we heard today, there were very lucky women that took a chance to do something to probably bring them out of their comfort zone. And I think that is quite important, that is considering to take the risk of getting out and seeing when the luck comes.
Point that I was trying to get across in this lack of individual solutions, or insufficiency of individual solutions and need for collective solutions, is that we have to work together. And that also means that we have to talk to each other when we're starting to feel uncomfortable, when we start to feel problems, when we start to feel a little bit like we're starting to sink under the surface. That's the time to ask, not when you're actually, sucking in the water into your lungs. And I think that not only are women willing to help each other, but some of the men would also help, right? And we have to be willing to accept that help and to move together.
I think you have to have more diversity in decision, in deciding positions, but at the same time, then you also have to agree on accepting these positions. And I have the impression that, especially at the beginning, I was very happy to complain about things that didn't work. but I didn't want to take the job of making them change. And then at a point, I had a discussion with a colleague who told me, okay, if you are really so unhappy with this, you should accept to be the president of that program and change it. And then I realized that he was right. I had to take that leading position. And I think accepting to take these leading roles, of course, you know that you will expose yourself. As I said before, that's not easy. You will expose yourself to your career, basically. Anytime you send a paper, you send a proposal, you're exposing yourself. And you do it even more when you take these leading roles. But it's really important because if you want to change things, you have to change them from inside and not from outside. I think it's important also to accept this burden.